What's going on, everybody? It's Look 5. Welcome back to another video. Now today we're just gonna hop right into it, okay? You guys saw the title. We have two of the best video games of our generation, definitely, and arguably of all time, going up against each other. In one half we have Breath of the Wild, the other half we have Red Dead Redemption 2. Let's get right into it. It's difficult to even begin this video knowing the events that will follow. On one hand, we'll be comparing two of the best and greatest games of our generation, and arguably of all time. On another hand, there are those who think it's stupid to compare the two. Apples can't be compared to oranges. And to that I say, yes the fuck they can, because they're both fruit. Sure, Breath of the Wild may be a game surrounded in a fantasy-based world and story with cartoon-like art styles. Red Dead may be a cowboy simulator with a gritty adult story surrounded in a realistic setting, but damn it, they're both open world video games that just so happen to be two of the best in their genre. So let's compare them. And as you know, in this Versus series, at least I don't know about other channels on YouTube, but in this Versus series, we do not leave any question open to interpretation. I will come up with a concrete answer and reason by the end of this video. But before that, a word from our sponsor, These Nuts. Now, today's sponsor is not by These Nuts, surprisingly, but it's by Raid Shadow Legends, a game that is so ass that it has to pay thousands upon thousands of YouTubers to talk about shit that they are nowhere near qualified to talk about. But see here, I'm gonna do the exact same thing, and hopefully I get a chunk of money for interrupting my own fucking video. Now, 90% of you have already fucking skipped to this part, but I'll still continue speaking any fucking ways. Now, Raid Shadow Legends is a first-person shooter that can be found on PCs, consoles such as PS4, PS5, Xbox, and half consoles such as the Nintendo Switch. Now, this game is not supported for iOS or Android devices, but the godlike first-person shooter elements of the game make up for it. Now, this game goes under constant updates thanks to it being made by the awesome developer that you see on your screen right now, who slightly resembles that of a registered sex offender. Now, the game's gameplay looks nearly identical to how it's portrayed in every single piece of media, and this game came out in 2018, which, I mean, you can clearly tell that it has, and not 2008. You can play Raid Shadow Legends today for only $9.99 in the App Store. Use promo code DEEZNUTS for a free hero upon your purchase. Now, comparing these two games is admittedly a difficult task. Both games are considered masterpieces in their own respect. Now, don't get me wrong, neither game is perfect, meaning there are flaws prevalent in both games. However, such is the case with Breath of the Wild, the common denominator between people calling the game quote-unquote overrated because of its flaws, at the same time they fail to acknowledge what it brings to the table to begin with. Both Breath of the Wild and Red Dead Redemption 2's flaws are heavily outweighed by their excellence. So I won't be taking in the widely perceived flaws into consideration. It will be kind of like a pissing contest. Half of Breath of the Wild shrines were blessing shrines, while Red Dead won't let you do anything without getting a bounty. It's sort of like comparing the attention to detail in the games and then rating one game over the other because of it. Like Breath of the Wild's enemies socialize and converse with each other, while Red Dead's NPCs can get their foot caught in the stirrup. Okay, we get it! So how will I be comparing these two games? Well, let's go with the most important aspects of what made the two games so great to begin with. Story, gameplay, additional gameplay, and game experience. This might only be 4 categories, but there's a lot to cover within them. So let's start off with the story. Warning, the following will contain spoilers for both stories. Don't be a dumbass. So, I'm not going to sit here and waste anyone's time, okay? Breath of the Wild's story was an absolute joke compared to Red Dead's story, and here's why. In Breath of the Wild, you wake up from a 100-year-long nap as Link, who was fighting the Great Calamity. The Great Calamity refers to when Ganon, the main antagonist, invaded Hyrule, took over the castle, and then Hyrule's technology, turning it against them. This is the cause of death to the 4 champions of Hyrule, who are the 4 rulers and warriors of 4 respective regions and races of Hyrule. This is obviously excluding Link because he is a champion in his own right, but obviously survives. In the best opening segment and tutorial in video game history, you start off by doing little tasks for the ghost of King Rome, who was dressed up as an old man. King Rome was the ruler of Hyrule during the Great Calamity. This is when you get used to the game, your rune abilities, and take into account different situations, whether it be, well, just that, the weather, different kinds of enemies, puzzles, etc. In a nutshell, you travel back to the 4 respective regions where each champion used to rule over. Remember how I'd said that the technology turned against Hyrule due to Ganon? Well, yeah, the Divine Beasts, giant machinery designed to protect Hyrule, is now under Ganon's control. Your job is to rid the Divine Beasts of Ganon's influence as they are causing sandstorms, meteor showers, flooding, and this one just flies around, I guess. Anyways, once you rid Ganon from the Divine Beasts by the means of prerequisite challenges, boarding the Divine Beasts, giant puzzles, and then a boss fight, you will be ready to fight the lingering Ganon over at Hyrule Castle. Once you beat Ganon, you and Zelda meet up, exchange a few words, and head over to Lanayru, where the events of the next game will take place. But because we aren't there yet, no matter how many times you beat the game, it will throw you back in the events before beating Ganon. Now the bulk of this story is told through optional flashbacks, aka visiting a certain location which evokes a sense of familiarity and then a memory. Oh, this is where I got my ass kicked 100 years ago, sort of thing. Now if you want to tell a good story, it cannot be ascertained through 18 2-minute cutscenes. Doing the math, it's a little over an hour of story versus the 60 hours of Red Dead's. To be fair, the actual quote-unquote story is 50 hours or so in Breath of the Wild, but it only has 30 minutes of storytelling. Now, I can end this entire segment with that alone, but I'll continue. The story in Breath of the Wild was meant to be taken seriously, unlike Age of Calamities, but it felt so disconnected from you as the player. This is again because of the use of flashbacks, which only serves in explaining why you are coming across so many ruins in the game and why guardians attack you. The story also wasn't executed properly. We don't see much character development or emotion. When we do, it's completely separate from your gameplay experience. For example, there's nothing I can do about Zelda's frustration in attempts to awaken her powers because that happened 100 years ago. The story of Breath of the Wild would have easily been better if we saw the effects and emotion brought out of the characters through cutscenes and actual dialogue. What if Azora lost their child due to the flooding of the Divine Beast? Or if we actually see Goron City being destroyed by the meteors? Instead, we get monumental amounts of dialogue with the occasional grunts of whoever is talking. When I hear the ghosts of the champions, how come it doesn't sound like their souls have been trapped in the Divine Beast for the past 100 years, like the game has explained to me? So now that you know what we're working with, let's go review Red Dead Redemption 2's story.
You saved my life. You're a good man.
You know, all that ever mattered to me was loyalty.
Red Dead Redemption 2 serves as the prequel to the first game. The Vonderling gang must survive against the decline of the Wild West era and evade law enforcement. This, on top of a lack of money. It is this lack of money that inspires the events of the entire game. In this game, you and the gang settle between 5 fictitious states to avoid law enforcement that is currently pursuing you. All throughout the game, you'll take on different identities, get into gunfights, and fight tuberculosis. I mean, laying out the entire story will take too long, even if I gave you a synopsis, so in an extreme summary, and I did say spoilers, the gang's plan, or the leader, Dutch's plan at least, is to steal enough money to make it to Panama. After moving across 4 different states, you and a few other gunslingers in the gang rob a bank, which goes south. You then escape by means of a boat in hopes to make it to Tahiti or Panama, whichever one Dutch wanted to go to. A storm occurs and the boat capsizes, washing you and the gang to shore. It is here in South America where the main character, Arthur Morgan, witnesses Dutch further into madness, feeding a man to the crocodiles, choking out an old lady, and after much more, Arthur turns skeptical of Dutch's plan. When they return to America, Arthur's skepticism rises, as does his illness. Eventually, the gang begins to lose faith in Dutch as he describes the dangers that will follow in the pursuit of treasure. Some members of the gang leave, some get killed, and law enforcement is pinning you down by the day. The remaining gang members rob a train which houses a shit ton of money, where your next protagonist, John Marston, gets shot in the process. Once the train is robbed, the gang gets together where John is seemingly dead, but turns up and is furious that Dutch left him for dead, and finding out that Micah, a loyal member of the gang, ratted Dutch out to the law enforcement. The gang takes sides in a shootout, but this shootout is interrupted by law enforcement, which separates the two gangs. However, when they meet up, Arthur tells John to leave and to be with his family, and then, eventually, Arthur is either left for dead or killed by Micah, depending on your level of honor. In the epilogue, John Marston works as a farmer, loses his wife and kids, and wins them over by hand building a house. You are free after this turn of events, where you play freely before the events of the last game occur. Now, the story was beautiful, but there was, of course, some flaws. I didn't get invested in it up until chapter 3 out of 6. And the story doesn't progress until the end of that chapter, meaning we could have started the game in chapter 3 and would have missed out on nothing. I say this to say that the game is heavily drawn out and it takes literally forever for it to progress. Also, the bulk of the missions led to a gunfight, with little variation between. One mission you were out on a hot air balloon, but you still got into a gunfight. Another mission you had to blow up a base with dynamite. It still led to a gunfight. But these glaring flaws cannot be compared to a story of Breath of the Wild's caliber. Even with the flaws, Red Dead Redemption 2's story is in an entirely different league. But let's say that Breath of the Wild had a good story and did everything right. Would it still be better than Red Dead Redemption 2's story? No. And that's because Red Dead's story is based on a realistic setting while Breath of the Wild is fictitious. Arthur dying of tuberculosis is relatable because you probably know someone who has had that same lung disease. But if relatability was the only thing that made Red Dead Redemption 2's story a better story than Breath of the Wild, then I would have to acknowledge that. But since it isn't the case, I'm going to gladly give this category to Red Dead. Again, I'm not interested in wasting anyone's time. Just how Red Dead's story takes a massive dump on Breath of the Wild's story, Breath of the Wild's gameplay is much better than Red Dead's. It's not that Red Dead's gameplay is bad, far from it actually, but it's just that Breath of the Wild's gameplay is so out of this world. The physics engine in Breath of the Wild allows for every single thing to be interactive. Not only that, but you can mix interactions and combine them. For example, there are so many ways to approach a fight other than using your swords, bows, arrows, and spears. In this clip, you see me dressing up as one of the bokoblins, and I'm able to lure them to the edge of a cliff using meat parts. And then watch this, once they're close enough, I literally use a Korok leaf to blow them off the cliff. That's what you get, motherfuckers. In this clip, it was raining. Lightning and rain don't go together, so I shoot an electric choo-choo jelly and kill this monster. In this one, I tied an Octark balloon to a piece of dynamite and left it in a camp full of dynamite. And so you see me kind of go off to the corner to trick the monsters back into the camp so they actually get blown up when the Octark balloon pops. And when it does, shit explodes! Now in this one, I finessed a bokoblin into a burning weapon and it caught fire and died. You can't go wrong with this one here, it's a classic. Now this motherfucker did not die from that explosion, so I used that to my advantage. The explosion made his weapon catch on fire. Not only did I make him burn grass and catch himself on fire, but his weapon completely burned out, then he didn't have shit to attack me with, and then I finished the job. Damn. But do you see what I'm getting at? There's so many ways to kill things in this game other than using your sword, shields, spears, and whatever weapons that are thrown at you. Red Dead's gameplay, on the other hand, is heavily derived from the story. If we're talking about the story, it's extremely linear compared to Breath of the Wild. And I wasn't lying when I said that most missions end up in a gunfight, but let's hone in on that. Because the bulk of the gameplay relies on gunfights, how good is that aspect of the game? Well, when I played Red Dead, I couldn't help but notice a very strong aim assist, literally dragging my crosshair onto an enemy's face. During the time I played the story, I didn't feel as though I was getting any better at aiming or at the game, but just more familiar and comfortable with it. And when I was fully familiar with the game, it was just a matter of predictability. When was this person going to pop their face out? When were they going to run to shoot at me? The most difficult part of the game was during the final fight between Micah and John. It makes sense that Micah was hard to kill because he's an experienced gunslinger. So why wasn't any of that varied into other story mode fights? You have a lasso, throwing knives, and a bow and arrow to mix things up, but don't use them because you'll die. And with guns being the strongest asset in the game, you will rely heavily on them. Although they'll depreciate, your guns won't break like weapons in Breath of the Wild, so you aren't incentivized to try something new. That, mixed with the fact that using anything other than a gun will most likely result in death and a significant reduction in money. So after using guns and more guns, you start to wonder what other aspects of core gameplay there are in this game, and that is a question that has no answer. Because of that, Breath of the Wild easily wins over in this criteria. Now, both games offer loads of additional gameplay. Breath of the Wild has over 120 shrines, 900 Korok seeds, 76 side quests, 42 shrine quests, and much more. In Red Dead, there are 90 official challenges, 178 animals to discover, 6 gangs, 63 different weapons, and 144 cigarette cards. And much more, of course. Both games, what I just mentioned barely scratches the surface in terms of additional content you can partake in. Collect all the horse bridles in Breath of the Wild, for example, or play all the kinds of table games in Red Dead. But I'll be judging this game based on additional gameplay that is most common or the additional gameplay that shapes an experience. So, not the little things, guys, because there are a lot of them in Breath of the Wild and in Red Dead. And again, if I were to be comparing the little things in both games, it would be a pissing contest. That being said, let's get into this category. In Red Dead, there are a variety of animals to study, hunt, and skin. You can use these killed animals to cook meat, craft clothes, and to saddle your horse, and much more. However, the strength of your weapon affects the quality of your kill, forcing the player to create new ammunition and to think twice about how they approach killing a certain animal. You can become a bounty hunter, rob trains, stores, so on and so forth. Getting into fights is pretty common, or you can simply help others that are in need of it. You can get drunk, shop for clothes, guns, food, go fishing, get a haircut, watch a movie if you want to. Who's telling you not to? Overall, Red Dead's additional gameplay is pretty grounded in reality. Cleaning off all your weapons when they get worn, apply scent lotion while hunting, or hair tonic to make your beard grow longer. Breath of the Wild's additional gameplay resides in exploration, the sense of coming across something you've never seen before. I'll never forget the time that I came across a mountain and decided to scale it to its peak. After doing so, I found an entire dragon and had to fight it. Getting into the list, however, you can ride things such as horses, deers, bears, and even monsters. You can build a house, build an entire town, find and upgrade your armor, play bowling, or race an NPC in a minigame. Collect some Korok seeds, cook different meals, take pictures of wildlife to put into your compendium, fight stronger enemies, create elixirs, find all the monster masks. Both games have lots of additional gameplay, and honestly, I'm not going to put one over the other in this category. The reason for which is because it made me compare these two games to begin with. Both games offer an insane amount of additional gameplay to coincide with their open worlds. All of the additional gameplay fits in nicely with their respective setting. Because there's so much for you to do, you can play either game for hours upon hours on end. Now finally, we're going to get into game experience / feel. Now, the opening segment of Breath of the Wild was extremely well executed. It offers the perfect blend of story and actual tutorial in a way that doesn't hold your hand. You have an objective, but there are several ways to get it done, and the game doesn't care how you do it as long as you do it at some point. The Great Plateau is a mini simulation of what the entire game has to offer, reduced enough that you can get a good understanding of how certain enemies will behave, how different environments affect your person, and how certain foods and armor benefits you in certain situations. In Red Dead, it is very story-centric, and it isn't until a few hours into the game that you will really be free. Just how Doug2Times said in his video pinning these games against each other, the open world and the story of Red Dead feels like two separate games. 1 second you can be exploring, hunting, taking a bath in a hotel, but come across the right NPC and they'll put you right into the linear aspect of the game. Now, both games have slow ass fucking sensitivity, and both games do this dumb ass thing where it reduces your walking speed when you enter a shop or a settlement or a stable. Like, let me walk! I'll say this though, Red Dead's controls were pretty wonky, as well as the game being a little clunky. Now, when I say a game is clunky, it means that the animations of that game are so drawn out that it will have a hard time keeping up with your inputs. I know that Red Dead's animations are drawn out spectacularly, but to a fault. When riding a horse, you'll have to hold down on your joystick for a certain period of time if you want to move even a little. This is why your horse runs into shit so often. GTA did fine with their character models, but everything is clunky in Red Dead. But, to be fair, it kind of works in Red Dead because it's sort of a slowly paced video game outside of a shootout. But this was still a glaring issue that hindered my gameplay experience. Breath of the Wild's animations, on the other hand, are seamless. I move my joystick, and Link moves accordingly. And let me get my hands on a speed boost elixir and it's a wrap from there. However, Breath of the Wild, although it has a lot of replay value, it becomes predictable in minor aspects. Side quests give you generally the same reward, along with the random chests found in shrines and in the overworld. There are only a few enemies in the game, the bulk of which are variations off of each other. There are a total of 71 enemies in the entire game, which sounds like a lot. But if we exclude the list of tiered enemies and enemies' alterations that will behave the same as another enemy, you get a total of 15 enemies. Both games got lazy in the cooking department, meaning Red Dead, if I killed a snake and then I killed a boar, I will hold the exact same kind of meat to the fire while cooking it. In Breath of the Wild, killing a fox and killing a deer just outright gave me the exact same kind of meat. Like, come on, bruh. I mean, technically the result of your cooking comes out different, but it would have been nice to see some different kinds of meat as a result of my hunting. Just like the different skinning animations for Red Dead's animals. Let's talk about what the games did right, and how these two games made it to the top. Now, Breath of the Wild is probably the most freedom-giving game you can play of its caliber, meaning technically Minecraft is more of a free game than Breath of the Wild, but does it have a story embedded in it? Exactly, that's what I thought. I mean, as an open world game, Breath of the Wild gives you the freedom of a sandbox game. After the Great Plateau, you can literally do whatever you want. You can complete whatever main quest or side quest you want, go to any location you want, and everything you can see, you can go to. It's this that provides Breath of the Wild with an unmatched sense of freedom and adventure. People 5 years later are still figuring out game mechanics and things they never knew about the game. Almost the same thing can be said for Red Dead Redemption 2. After the main story, you can do a lot of things. However, the bounty system prohibits a lot of your freedom. And to be honest, that's what makes the game not as free as Breath of the Wild. But it also plays into an aspect that allows Red Dead Redemption 2 to rival Breath of the Wild. And that aspect is realism. Red Dead Redemption 2 throws you into an immersive world that genuinely feels living and breathing. It was Rockstar's goal to create the most realistic world, and that's a goal that they've accomplished to this day. You can hunt animals, animals can hunt each other. If I wanted to, I could kill anybody in that game besides the main and supporting characters. Actions have consequences. Kill a bunch of people, a bounty is placed on your head. Use your weapon too much, it'll get worn out. The skinning animations in this game, I mean, wow. Your horse will get scared if a pack of wolves runs up on you. Scavengers will surround a dead body, and I'm not even scratching the surface. Red Dead Redemption 2 is probably the most realistic game to this day. But is it realistic to a fault? The realism prevents me from doing certain things that you might aspire to do in a video game. Link can climb trees, vertical walls, and even mountains. But if you try to climb anything of that sort in Red Dead, you and the game's ragdoll physics will get to know each other very quickly. Wrapping this segment up, I'd say Red Dead has a more intuitive and interactive world where I can do anything within the realm of realism. It gives me one of the best stories, better than most movies I've watched, and the attention to detail is insane. Breath of the Wild, on the other hand, offers me a free world with seamless maneuverability, a worse story, but with much more varied missions and gameplay mechanics, a true sense of adventure, and almost endless amounts of enjoyment. For this category, I will give Breath of the Wild a slight edge. Honestly, it depends on how I'm feeling that day, and it really does boil down to personal preference. Would you like to shoot a mythical creature in the face with a shock arrow? Or would you like to go outside and blow somebody's face off with a sawed-off shotgun? Overall, I'm going to say that Breath of the Wild has a slight edge over Red Dead Redemption 2. Although Red Dead offered me a better story and a more realistic and believable world, the gameplay is very limiting when being put up against Breath of the Wild. And although it came close, Red Dead couldn't match that same sense of adventure, wonder, and freedom that Breath of the Wild gives you. And because of that, I say Breath of the Wild is a better game. Let's not get it twisted. Red Dead Redemption 2 is the #1 open world video game that is out right now. But Breath of the Wild is above an open world video game. It is just on another level in terms of games in that genre. Even glorified games such as Elden Ring and Horizon Zero Dawn has taken so much inspiration from what Breath of the Wild has created, and that cannot be ignored. Both games sit at the throne of the genre, exceeding their own and pushing the boundaries for open world video games. They've also created games that won't be matched by the majority of games in their genre until at least 5 to 7 years from now. If you guys enjoyed the video, let me know. If you agree, disagree, put that in the comments down below. Bars, you get how I'm working. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you watch my videos consistently. Also check out my Twitch channel. And with that, I'll catch you guys on the next one.